Hey there, future IELTS champ. You know you're working hard getting ready for that speaking test, and we are here to help you get a real advantage. Today's deep dive, museums.
Yeah.
They come up more often than you think in part one.
Yeah, it's true. And, you don't have to be like a museum expert or anything like that. But showing that you can chat about museums naturally and with some interesting vocab is a really good way to impress the examiner.
Okay, so let's get tactical. We've gone through a ton of materials on this, and this idea of like a three-step structure for answers really stood out to me. What's that all about?
Well, it's about making sure you're not just giving like the bare minimum. So imagine the examiner asks, do you enjoy going to museums? You could just say yes.
Right.
But where's the fun in that? A really strong answer has three parts. The direct response.
Okay.
Then you elaborate on your yes, and then you give a specific example.
So instead of just saying yes, I might say something like, yes, I love going to museums because they always spark my curiosity. For example, last week I went to a science museum and saw this incredible exhibit on renewable energy. It was fascinating.
Exactly. You directly answered the question, you gave a reason why you like museums, and then you made it real with an example.
Mm.
That shows the examiner you can use the language in a more sophisticated way.
Yeah, I see how this could apply to like other questions too. Is this three-step structure something I should be using for like all of part one, even if the topic isn't museums?
Absolutely. It's a really versatile framework. You can think of it as building like a mini speech every time you answer a question. You've got the foundation, the walls, and then the roof to top it off.
Gotcha. So back to museums, what are some of the questions that I might actually get asked?
Well, besides whether you enjoy going to museums, they might ask how often you go, what types of museums are interesting to you, if museums are popular in your country, things like that.
Okay.
They're trying to see how you communicate, not if you know a ton about museums.
Okay, that's reassuring. So even if like the last time I went to a museum was back when I was a kid, I can still do well with these questions.
Definitely. Like we said, it's all about using English fluently and accurately, not about proving you're a museum aficionado.
Okay, cool. Speaking of fluency, I've seen this idea come up a few times in the materials. Practice fluency, not perfection. What does that even mean for someone getting ready for the IELTS?
It's a really important point. A lot of people get really caught up trying to sound like a textbook, but that makes them sound less fluent.
Hmm.
Think of it this way. Would you rather listen to someone who maybe stumbles a little bit while telling you a really captivating story, or someone who recites a perfectly memorized but super boring paragraph?
Yeah, the captivating story for sure. I'm guessing the examiner would feel the same way. But how do I practice this fluency over perfection thing when I'm by myself getting ready for the test?
Well, that's where that tip about expanding your answers comes in.
Okay. It's tied directly to building fluency. Instead of giving just a one-word answer, challenge yourself to speak for a little bit longer.
Right.
Using that three-step structure we talked about, you'll naturally start to feel more comfortable with the flow of the language.
So it's like I'm training my brain to think and speak in English more spontaneously.
Exactly. The more you practice expanding your answers, the less you're going to feel like you have to overthink every word, and the more natural and fluent you'll sound.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's almost like practicing improvisation
Right.
for a conversation. You have a structure, but within that you can play around and be more spontaneous.
I like that analogy. And that's also where having a strong vocabulary is important too. The materials emphasize this lexical resource. It basically means using a variety of words well. So instead of saying things in a museum, you could talk about the exhibits or the
Yeah.
artifacts or the collections.
So it's about painting a more detailed picture with your words.
Yes.
Not just telling the examiner about going to a museum,
Yeah.
but making them feel like they went there with you. Exactly. That's what impressive communication is really all about. You're not just giving information, you're engaging your audience.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
So for someone listening who's maybe feeling a little bit overwhelmed by all of this, what's the one piece of advice they should really take away from today?
Honestly, I'd say relax and focus on the communication. The examiner isn't expecting you to be like a flawless robot or something. They want to see that you can have a conversation in English.
So basically, be yourself, be engaging, let your personality come through.
Exactly. After all, the more you enjoy the conversation, the more natural and fluent you're going to sound.
Perfect. All right, so we've covered the importance of fluency over perfection, expanding your answers with the three-step structure, and using some good museum vocabulary. What else can our listener expect as we dive deeper into this topic?
Well, we've got some really fascinating role play examples from the materials that bring all these ideas to life.
Oh, cool.
They show how someone might handle these museum questions in an actual exam. And we're going to break down exactly what makes their answers so good.
Sounds good. Let's jump right in. Okay, so let's actually analyze one of these role plays.
Right.
It's like getting a sneak peek into an actual IELTS speaking test.
Right.
In this scenario, the examiner asks, what type of museums are you most interested in?
Okay, let's see what the candidate says.
Okay.
I'd have to say history museums. I find it fascinating to learn about different cultures and how people lived in the past. For instance, there's this museum in my city that has this amazing collection of ancient Roman artifacts. I was just amazed by all the intricate details and the stories they tell about life centuries ago.
Wow, I'm already impressed. They totally nailed that three-step structure we were talking about.
Yeah.
But what else makes this answer so effective?
Well, it's the way they combined a clear structure with those engaging details. Notice how they didn't just say, oh, I like history museums. They explained why they find them fascinating.
Right.
They use vivid language, too, like intricate details and stories they tell.
Yeah, that's true. It's like they're painting a picture for the examiner with their words. And they didn't just mention any random museum.
Yeah.
They talked about a specific one in their city and what impressed them about it.
Exactly. That level of detail shows that they're not just reciting memorized answers. They're actually engaging with the question
Right.
in a thoughtful way. It shows they can connect their personal experiences to the topic,
Yeah.
which is super important for fluency and coherence.
I'm really starting to see how all these pieces fit together, the structure, the vocabulary, that personal touch.
Yeah.
It's not about memorizing facts. It's about using language to really express yourself in a genuine and engaging way.
Absolutely. And that's actually something you can practice outside of IELTS prep, too.
Oh, okay.
Next time you're telling a friend about a movie you saw or a restaurant you went to, think about how you can use really descriptive language and some specific examples to make your story come alive.
Yeah.
Those same skills will definitely help you during the speaking test.
That's such good advice. Okay, so let's switch gears for a second. The materials also talk about staying calm and confident during the test.
Yes.
Do these role plays demonstrate that at all?
Yeah, they do. Notice how even when the candidate isn't 100% sure about their answer, they don't freak out. They might say something like, that's an interesting question.
Yeah.
I'll think for a moment. Or, I'm not really familiar with that specific museum, but, things like that. They're buying themselves time to think without losing their cool.
So it's like they're showing the examiner that they're comfortable with those natural pauses that happen in a conversation.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes me feel better because I tend to overthink things.
Yeah, it's totally understandable to feel nervous.
Yeah.
But remember, the examiner wants to see you do well. They know you're taking a tough exam in another language. So just take a deep breath. Remember those tips we've talked about and focus on communicating your ideas clearly and with confidence.
That makes sense. Speaking of communication, let's look at another role play. This time the examiner asks, are museums important in your opinion?
This is a classic IELTS question.
Okay.
It goes beyond simple facts.
Okay.
They want to hear what you think.
Right.
And why. Let's see how this candidate answers.
All right.
Yes, I believe museums are incredibly important for a few reasons. First, they preserve history and culture so future generations can learn from the past. They also inspire people through art and science and different kinds of human expression. For example, I recently went to this museum about the history of technology, and it really made me appreciate how far we've come as a society.
Wow. Okay. I like how they start with a clear statement of their opinion and then give a couple of strong reasons to back it up. And they didn't forget the example. They brought up a specific museum and tied it back to a bigger idea about progress.
Exactly. That's what makes the answer so good.
Yeah.
They showed they can think critically and explain their thoughts clearly and connect their ideas to the real world.
It's almost like they're having a conversation with the examiner, not just answering a question.
Right.
And that conversational tone probably makes them sound so natural and fluent.
You're absolutely right. It's that ability to have a natural conversation that really impresses examiners.
So we've covered a ton today. Understanding the scoring criteria, that three-step structure, even looking at how real candidates answer these questions, plus tips for staying calm and confident. What's the one key takeaway you want our listener to leave with?
I think it all comes down to this. The IELTS speaking test is about communication,
Yeah.
not just memorization. If you focus on having a clear structure, using engaging language, and expressing yourself genuinely, You can show the examiner you can communicate in English even when talking about something like museums.
Yeah, it has been really interesting breaking these role plays down and seeing how a good candidate answers these museum questions. It's like they're combining all these different things, the structure, the vocabulary, the personal touch, to create this tapestry of communication.
It is kind of like weaving. And like with a tapestry, the more threads you have, the richer and more interesting the final product is going to be. That's why it's so important to practice all these different parts of language, the fluency, the vocabulary, the structure. That way you have a bunch of tools you can use during the test.
You've mentioned vocabulary a few times. Are there any specific words or phrases about museums that you think would really impress the examiner?
Oh, for sure. Words like curator, exhibition, artifact, heritage, conservation, even something as simple as saying interactive exhibit instead of just activity. All those things show a deeper understanding of the topic.
So it's not just about using like big fancy words, it's about choosing the right words for the topic.
Exactly. It's about showing the examiner that you know more than just basic vocabulary, and you've actually spent time learning new words that are relevant to the IELTS speaking test.
Yeah, that makes sense. Before we wrap up, I want to touch on something we haven't really talked about directly, pronunciation. It's one of the four main criteria. So how can our listener make sure their pronunciation is clear and easy to understand?
Good point. Pronunciation is something people forget about a lot, but it's super important for communicating well. The key is to focus on clarity and stress. So make sure you're enunciating clearly, especially with those museum words like museum or exhibition. And pay attention to word stress. Even a simple word like photograph can have different meanings depending on where you put the emphasis.
So it's not just about saying the words right, it's about saying them naturally and making sure people understand what you mean.
Exactly. And that's something you can work on by listening to native English speakers. Pay attention to how they say words and phrases. You could even record yourself speaking and listen back to see if there are areas you can improve.
All right, so to recap, we've covered a lot today. Fluency, vocabulary, structure, pronunciation, how to stay calm and confident, and even adding those personal touches to make your answers stand out. I have to say, I feel a lot more prepared to answer these museum questions now.
Me too. And remember, the best way to feel confident is to practice. So use those strategies we've talked about and start using them. Find some IELTS practice questions online or in books. Come up with your answers and practice saying them out loud. You could even record yourself and listen back to see where you can get better.
And don't forget that important piece of advice, practice fluency, not perfection. Don't worry too much about sounding like a textbook.
Right?
The goal is to have a natural conversation and show the examiner you can communicate well in English.
Absolutely. The IELTS speaking test is your chance to shine. It's where you can share your thoughts and experiences with the examiner. So relax, be yourself, and let your personality come through in your answers.
Great advice. And with that, we're going to wrap up our deep dive into museums and the IELTS speaking test. We hope this has been helpful as you prepare for the IELTS. Good luck with the test. We know you'll do great.